Snow fell on Willow Creek like sifted sugar that night, soft and quiet, the kind that made even the streetlights look kind. Inside my house, the warmth was almost too much. The scent of pine from the old tree in the corner, the steady crackle from the stone fireplace, the hum of laughter that didn't quite reach my son's eyes. I had spent the whole day making it perfect. Christmas was supposed to feel like home again, the way it used to when Maggie was alive. She used to hum carols under her breath while the ham roasted, and I'd pretend not to notice just so she'd hum louder. But Maggie had been gone 8 years now. And since then, holidays had become obligations, not celebrations. Still, I tried. The long dining table glowed under the chandelier. My daughter-in-law Jenna poured wine, while my grandson Noah scrolled on his phone, earbuds in, half listening to whatever Evan, my son, was saying about the business. His auto shop, Merritt Motors, had been losing money for 2 years. "Rough quarter, Dad," Evan said, cutting into the roast with a dull knife. "Customers are getting pickier. Costs are higher. The bank's tightening up loans. You wouldn't believe how stressful it is." I smiled the way fathers do when they want to sound proud instead of worried. "You've always figured things out, son." He shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of scraping by." I didn't answer. I'd already helped him twice this year, once with payroll, once with rent. I told myself it was temporary, that he'd turn things around. When dinner slowed, when the glasses were half empty, and the music had faded into background static, I cleared my throat. "Evan," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, "I've got something for you." He looked up, half interested. "What's this?" "Just a little help," I said, sliding an envelope across the table. "Merry Christmas." Jenna leaned forward first. "What is it?" He tore it open with a casual flick. The check sat neatly inside. $5,000, I said. "It should help with whatever's." He didn't look up, just stared at it, thumb brushing over the ink. "That's it?" The words dropped like stones. Jenna's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Noah's music leaked faintly from his earbuds, some pop song that suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge. I blinked. "What do you mean, that's it?" Evan looked at me, eyes dull and cold. "I've been killing myself keeping that shop open. You know how much equipment costs, how much insurance costs, and you hand me this like it's some kind of tip?" My chest tightened. "It's not a tip. It's what I can manage this month," I thought. "No, Dad," he interrupted, voice rising. "You don't think. You throw money around when it makes you feel like the hero. You pay bills, you patch holes, but it's never because you trust me. It's always because you need to be in control." The air went heavy, the kind of heavy that makes you forget how to swallow. I tried to smile, tried to calm him. "Evan, I'm not trying to control you. I just want to help you get through this." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "Help me? You want to help? The best gift you could give me is to stop pretending you're some savior. The best gift would be for you to leave us alone forever." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The fire cracked behind me. The smell of pine turned sharp, like sap burning. I heard the tick of Maggie's old clock on the wall, steady as a pulse. Then, nothing. Noah looked up finally, wide-eyed. Jenna's lips parted but no sound came out. I stared at my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd bailed out more times than I could count. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly. He met my gaze without a flicker of shame. "You heard me. You're always here, hovering, reminding everyone what you've paid for. The house, the cars, Noah's tuition. You make us all feel like charity cases. Maybe we'd finally breathe if you weren't around to remind us we're failures." I didn't realize my hands were trembling until I felt my fork clatter against the plate. Jenna whispered, "Evan, please." "Don't please me," he snapped, waving her off. "He needs to hear it." I looked around that table at my grandson, pretending not to exist, at Jenna staring at her wine glass, at the check lying flat between the plates like a corpse no one wanted to claim. My mouth was dry. I thought we were a family. Evan scoffed. We are. But families grow up. You don't own us just because you wrote the checks. For a long moment, all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint whistle of wind outside. I see, I said softly. I pushed back my chair, its legs scraping the hardwood with a sound that made Jenna flinch. Excuse me, I need some air. No one stopped me. The kitchen light was harsh after the glow of the dining room. I leaned on the counter, staring out the window into the snow. My reflection looked older than I remembered, gray hair, lines deep as scars. From the other room came the murmur of voices, Jenna's whisper, Evan's mutter, then laughter, low, forced, like someone trying to pretend nothing had just cracked wide open. I turned off the light and stood in the dark, watching the snowflakes drift under the porch light, each one unique, melting the instant it hit the window. Fragile, beautiful, temporary. For a long time, I didn't move. The check sat abandoned in the next room, my son's words still echoing against the walls Maggie once decorated with warmth. The best gift would be for you to leave us alone. Forever. He said it like he meant it. And that night, for the first time in my life, I began to believe he just might get his wish. I didn't sleep that night. The house felt like a stranger breathing beside me, familiar walls, foreign air. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of the old furnace sounded like a memory trying to apologize. But I wasn't ready to forgive anyone. Not them, not myself. I sat in my study with the lamp turned low, the amber light catching the edges of old photographs. One of them showed Maggie holding baby Evan in her arms, sunlight pouring through the hospital window. She was smiling the way only new mothers can, that private smile that says, "This is ours, and it's enough." I traced her face with my thumb, and for a heartbeat, I could almost hear her humming again. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. I reached for the metal box under my desk, the one Maggie used to call Harold's second heart. Inside, neatly bound in rubber bands, were 2 decades of receipts and records, checks written, transfers made, debts erased, proof of everything I'd poured into Evan's life. I spread them across the desk like crime scene photos. 2010, the down payment on his first house. 2013, the business startup loan. 2017, a hospital bill after Jenna's car accident. 2021, Noah's tuition when Evan's credit cards maxed out. The numbers formed a story no one had ever thanked me for. $420,000. That's what love had cost me so far. The realization didn't come with anger, not at first. It came with something colder, something like clarity. I poured myself a cup of coffee that had long gone bitter, took a sip, and let the burn remind me I was still alive. The house was silent, except for the ticking of that old clock. Maggie had bought it from an antique shop our first year in Appleton. "So you'll never lose track of time," she'd teased. I had laughed then. Now the sound of it felt cruel. Time. That was the one thing I'd been giving away even faster than money. A faint sound broke through the quiet, the wind pushing against the window pane, or maybe something else. I listened harder. Upstairs, a door creaked. Voices. Evan's voice, low but angry, seeping through the vents. "Sick of it, Jen. He'll never stop. We should just sell the place. Get out of here." Sell the place. I froze. Jenna's muffled reply, "You can't sell it, Evan. It's his house." Silence, then Evan again. Harsher now. "Not for long." My pulse thudded in my ears. I sat perfectly still until the floorboards upstairs settled again. Then I turned toward the file cabinet beside the bookshelf. On the top drawer, the old brass label still read, "Property, Willow Creek House," in Maggie's handwriting. I pulled it open. The purchase deed was yellowed with time, but clear. Maggie's name had once been there beside mine, before she passed, and I refinanced the mortgage to cover Evan's business losses. The updated document showed a single owner. Owner, Harold Merritt. No co-signers. No family trust. No shared equity. Just me. My breath caught, sharp and unsteady. For years, I had told myself the house belonged to us, that this was our family home, Evan's inheritance, Noah's future. But legally, it was mine. Every payment, every repair, every snowstorm I'd shoveled through, all mine. I stared at my signature, shaky from age but still strong enough to end things if I wanted to. Maggie's words came back, the ones she'd said before the cancer took her. Harold, don't confuse love with surrender. You can't save someone who enjoys drowning. Back then, I thought she meant Evan's stubbornness about money. Now I understood. She hadn't been talking about money at all. She was warning me about this moment, the day my son would learn to weaponize my love. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 1. Each chime felt heavier than the last. I stood, bones aching, and looked around the study. The shelves were lined with manuals from my years as a mechanical engineer: precision, order, balance. Those principles had built bridges and machines. They should have built families too. But I'd spent my life fixing everything except the people I loved most. I took out Maggie's old journal from the drawer. She'd written during her chemo days, pages filled with shaky handwriting and faith stronger than I ever had. On one page near the end, her ink had smeared into a tear stain. If he ever makes you feel small, Harold, remember you gave enough. Love doesn't mean you owe forever. I closed the journal and sat in silence. Outside, the snow had thickened, covering the yard like a clean slate. Somewhere down the street, a plow scraped against pavement. The world kept moving, indifferent to one old man learning the truth too late. I folded the house deed, slipped it back into its folder, and locked the drawer. My reflection in the dark window looked like a stranger, tired eyes, lines carved deep by decades of compromise. Then, almost without thinking, I whispered into the empty room, "You wanted me gone, Evan? You might just get your wish." The sound of my own voice startled me, but there was no taking it back. That night, I sat in the chair until dawn, the first light crawling across the snow. The decision wasn't formed yet. Not fully, but something inside me had shifted, something final, irreversible. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about saving my son. I was thinking about saving myself. The morning after that long night broke gray and cold. The kind of Wisconsin morning where the air bites before the coffee cools. I'd barely slept, but I didn't feel tired, just steady. Like a bridge that's taken years of weight and finally decides it's time to stop carrying it. By 8, I was already driving through downtown Appleton, the streets glazed in thin ice, Christmas decorations sagging from the lampposts. I hadn't driven this early in years, but I knew where I was going. Charles Nguyen's office sat above an old bakery that smelled of cinnamon and burnt sugar. We'd worked together at the engineering firm decades ago, before he switched careers and became one of the most trusted real estate attorneys in town. He looked surprised when I walked in. "Harold Merritt," he said, rising from behind his oak desk. "Haven't seen you since the retirement party. How's life treating you?" I gave a tired smile. "It's finally answering back." He chuckled softly, then caught the look in my eyes and gestured to the chair. "All right. What's happened?" I laid the folder on his desk, the property deed, the mortgage payoff records, the receipts I'd kept all these years. He flipped through them with the same calm precision he'd once used to review blueprints. "This house, Willow Creek," I said. "I need to know, without a doubt, whose name is on it." Charles nodded, adjusted his glasses, and scanned the latest deed. "It's just you, Harold. You refinanced it in 2018 after your wife's estate settled. That cleared her name from co-ownership. No one else is listed. So, legally," I said slowly, "Evan's just living there?" "Exactly. He's a guest. A family member without tenancy rights unless you've signed something I don't know about." I shook my head. "No lease, no contract." Charles set the papers down and leaned back. "Then you can ask him to leave. Legally, Wisconsin's property laws are clear about this. You issue a written notice 15 days to vacate. If he refuses, you can file an eviction through the county court. But Harold, are you sure this is the road you want to walk down?" I stared at the papers. The black ink looked heavier than it should have, as if each line weighed a decade. I've been walking down every road he chose for 20 years. Maybe it's time I picked one myself. He nodded, slow and understanding. While Charles began drafting the notice, I glanced around his office. The same diplomas hung on the wall, but now there were photos of his grandkids next to them. Little smiling faces that looked untouched by bitterness. I envied that. Charles printed the document and slid it across to me. Here it is, a formal notice to vacate premises. You can serve it by hand or certified mail. Once you sign, the clock starts. My hand hovered over the paper. I could feel Maggie's voice at the back of my mind. Don't confuse love with surrender. So, I signed. The pen left a clean, deliberate line. Charles studied me. You know, Harold, sometimes letting go looks like cruelty to the people who never knew boundaries. But it's the only kindness that teaches. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. He told me the best gift would be me gone. I'm just giving him exactly what he wanted. Charles's eyes softened. And what will you do once they're gone? I looked out the window at the snow beginning to fall again, flakes spinning slow and quiet between the rooftops. Maybe I'll finally see what peace looks like when you stop paying for everyone else's happiness. He smiled faintly. Then make sure you get a receipt for that too. We both laughed, low and weary. When I left his office, the church bells down the street were ringing 11. The bakery below had just opened, and the smell of fresh bread rolled out into the cold. I bought 2 rolls out of habit, one for me, one for Maggie, and caught myself halfway through the thought. She'd been gone 8 years, but the habit of remembering was stronger than grief. Driving home, the notice sat on the passenger seat, heavy as a verdict. As I turned into Willow Creek, the house came into view, the snow-dusted roof, the wreath still hanging crooked on the door Jenna had decorated last week. From the outside, it looked peaceful. Inside, I knew it was just silence wearing makeup. Evan's car wasn't in the driveway. Jenna's SUV was gone too. Only Noah's skateboard leaned against the porch railing, forgotten and wet. I parked, carried the notice inside, and set it on the kitchen counter where everyone would see it. For a moment, I stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the quiet hum of the heater. It sounded like the house was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. On the mantel, Maggie's photo smiled down at me, same as always. I'm doing what you told me to, sweetheart, I murmured. No more surrender. I turned off the lights and left the notice where the morning sun would hit it first. Then I went upstairs to pack a small suitcase, nothing much, just clothes, my watch, Maggie's journal, and the folder with every proof I'd need. This wasn't running away. It was reclaiming the life I'd let others rent for free. As I zipped the bag, I glanced out the window. The snowfall had thickened, blanketing everything white, clean, new. By the time they woke up tomorrow, they'd find the paper on the counter and understand. The 15-day clock would start ticking. And for the first time in years, I felt the faint rhythm of my own heart keeping time with something that finally belonged to me. The next morning broke with a strange calm, as if the whole house was holding its breath. Sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, landing right on the folded notice to vacate on the kitchen counter. The golden seal of Charles's office glimmered faintly in the light. I poured myself coffee and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Evan came down first, hair uncombed, still in yesterday's flannel. He rubbed his eyes and yawned, then froze when he saw the envelope. "What's this?" I didn't answer. I just took a sip of coffee, slow and quiet. He tore it open, scanned the first few lines, and his expression twisted. "You've got to be kidding me." Jenna appeared at the top of the stairs, half asleep. "What's going on?" Evan's voice rose. "He's evicting us!" Jenna blinked. "What?" He slammed the paper on the counter. "Look at this! 15 days to vacate. Harold, what the hell is this?" I set down my cup. "It's what you asked for." Evan's jaw tightened. "You're out of your mind." "Am I?" I said. "Because last night, You made yourself very clear. You said the best gift would be me, gone. So I'm giving you your gift, and I'm taking mine, peace." He laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that came from humor. It was sharp, brittle, defensive. "You think you can just kick us out of here? You don't even own the whole house. Mom's half was mine after she died." The words stung not because they were true, but because of how confidently he said them. I walked to my study, opened the drawer, and came back with the deed folder. I laid it on the table. "You're wrong. When your mother passed, I refinanced to cover your business debts. Her share was transferred into my name. The house is mine alone. I paid for every inch of this roof you sleep under." His face went pale, but anger rose quick to replace it. "That can't be right. I saw her will. It said—" "She left me everything," I interrupted softly, "because she trusted me to use it wisely. You never read the rest of it, did you?" He stared at me, the realization flickering in his eyes like a match. "You're bluffing." I didn't answer. He stormed upstairs, and I heard drawers opening, papers rustling. Jenna stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, wringing her hands. "Harold," she said quietly, "you can't just throw him out. He's your son." I turned to her. He stopped acting like one a long time ago. Moments later, Evan came back down, holding a crumpled photocopy of Maggie's old will. "It says right here, Dad, everything to you, but it doesn't say exclusive. You can't just take the house." I reached for the original will in my folder and handed it to him. "You have a copy. I have the one with her handwritten amendment. She added a clause before she passed." He hesitated before taking it. His eyes darted over the text, then narrowed as he reached the last page. "In the event of financial misuse, fraud, or forgery by any beneficiary, the estate's full ownership shall revert solely to Harold Merritt, voiding all secondary claims." Maggie's signature was there, shaky but clear. He swallowed. "Forgery? What does that have to do with me?" I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You tell me. Or should I show you the digital loan request I found in my inbox last night?" The color drained from his face. "The one you submitted," I continued, "to Lakeshore Credit, using my name, my social security number, and my email. The one for $50,000 you called a business emergency." I didn't. "Don't lie to me, Evan," I said, my voice low but steady. "You used my digital signature. I recognized the old password you guessed years ago. The one with Maggie's birthday." Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. "Evan, tell me that's not true." "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I said. "Because the bank emailed me this morning. They flagged the application, said it matched a previous pattern of identity verification from my computer." He went silent. "Do you have any idea what that means, legally?" I asked. "Forgery, fraud, federal offense. Your mother's clause applies the moment I report it." Jenna looked between us, trembling. "You forged your father's name?" "Evan, my God." He tried to speak, but nothing came out. I stepped closer, not angry, just tired. "You didn't need to do this. If you'd just asked, I might have helped again. But you used my name to steal. You turned the trust your mother built into leverage." He sank into the chair, face buried in his hands. "I'm not pressing charges," I said quietly. "Not yet. But I've filed the notice. In 15 days, this house will be mine again, just as the law says it should be." He looked up, eyes red. "You'd really do that to your own family?" "No," I said softly. "You already did." The silence that followed was unbearable. Jenna cried quietly, the sound of it mixing with the faint ticking of the wall clock. I went upstairs to pack my things. As I zipped the suitcase, I could hear Evan pacing, muttering to himself, the creak of the floorboards tracking his frustration. The sound of a man realizing the mirror finally showed the truth. Before I left the room, I opened Maggie's journal again. There was a line I'd missed before. "When truth finally arrives, it won't knock. It will walk right through the door you left unlocked." I smiled sadly. "You always saw everything before I did," I whispered. By the time I came downstairs, The kitchen was empty. The eviction notice was crumpled, but still there on the counter. I smoothed it gently, placed it back under the golden seal, and left it where the morning light could find it again. As I stepped outside, the snow had started falling harder. The world looked clean, untouched. I locked the door behind me, knowing I wouldn't be coming back to it the same way again. The wind howled through the pine trees as I whispered into the white silence, "Goodbye, Maggie. I'm finally keeping the promise I made." And somewhere deep inside, beneath the ache and the loss, a quiet certainty began to take shape. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything I had been too afraid to start. By the next morning, the house no longer felt like mine. The air was heavy, like it belonged to someone else. Evan's car was gone. Jenna's SUV too. The silence they left behind was almost polite, as if they'd finally realized noise had lost its power over me. I brewed coffee, but it tasted different, not bitter, just empty. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the eviction notice lying perfectly flat beside the folded check from Christmas night. 2 pieces of paper that summed up 34 years of fatherhood, giving and reclaiming. Outside, the snow had stopped. Sunlight hit the frozen lake behind the house, making it look like glass. For the first time in a long while, I thought about peace not as something you beg for, but something you build. I picked up my phone and dialed my bank. "Mr. Merritt," the woman said kindly after verifying my account, "you still have a remaining balance of $38,412 on your mortgage. Would you like to schedule a payment?" "No," I said, watching the sunlight flicker on the icy windows. "I'd like to finish it." She paused. "Finish?" "I want to pay it off. Right now." It took 20 minutes, 2 transfers and a confirmation code, but when it was done, she said the words that felt like thunder. "Congratulations, Mr. Merritt. Your account shows a 0 balance. Your home is officially paid in full." I thanked her, hung up, and printed the confirmation from my email. The bold black line at the bottom read, "Paid in full. Property released." I placed it inside the same folder as Maggie's will and the deed, closed the metal clip, and exhaled. The papers didn't just prove ownership, they proved closure. Next, I wrote a letter. Short, deliberate, honest. Evan, you said you wanted me gone. I won't fight that anymore. I'm leaving this house and this state. The property belongs to me, legally and rightfully. But you have 14 days to collect your things. After that, any unclaimed possessions will be considered abandoned under Wisconsin law. There will be no more money, no more bailouts, no more rescues. You wanted to breathe without me. Now you can. Dad*. I sealed the letter and tucked it into a plain white envelope. Then I placed it under the old mantel clock, Maggie's clock. She used to wind it every Sunday after church. Its slow ticking had filled the house with rhythm for decades. That's where I knew Evan would look first when he came home. I walked through every room one last time. Maggie's art still hung in the hallway, her watercolor of Lake Winnebago, the one she'd painted on our 30th anniversary. I almost took it down, but something told me to leave it. Some ghosts deserve to stay behind. Upstairs, Noah's old bedroom smelled faintly of detergent and the peppermint gum he always chewed. I closed the door softly, imagining the boy he used to be, the one who'd call me Grandpa Bear and fall asleep on my shoulder during Packers games. The suitcase by my bed was already packed. 2 shirts, 1 pair of slacks, a jacket, Maggie's journal, and the folder of documents. I wasn't running away. I was walking towards something that might finally resemble freedom. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone until I found what I was looking for. A one-way flight to Maui, departing in 48 hours. I didn't think. I just booked it. When the confirmation email arrived, I smiled for the first time in weeks. That night, I ate dinner alone, soup and half a roll of bread from the bakery below Charles's office. The simple kind of meal, Maggie used to say, was humble food for honest hearts. The clock ticked quietly in the other room. Every sound felt final: the hum of the fridge, the faint groan of old pipes, the whisper of wind under the eaves. Before going to bed, I stepped outside to the porch. The night sky was wide open, cold stars scattered above the lake. I pulled my coat tighter and looked at the reflection of the moon on the ice. "I'm not angry anymore, Maggie," I murmured. "I just want to rest." For a moment, I could almost hear her voice in the wind, soft, forgiving, proud. Inside, I turned off every light except the one by the front door, left burning low, a small beacon for closure. As I lay down, sleep came easily for the first time in years. Tomorrow, I would leave this house behind, not as an exile, but as a man who'd finally paid every debt, even the invisible ones. And for once, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. The airport was still half asleep when I arrived. The sliding doors whispered open, releasing a gust of warm air that smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel. I moved slowly, unhurried, suitcase rolling behind me like a quiet shadow. For once, I didn't feel guilty about leaving. I'd left notes, documents, and the truth. There was nothing more to explain. As the plane climbed through the gray Wisconsin sky, I looked out the window and watched the land shrink into patches of white and brown. Somewhere below was the frozen lake, the old house, the ghosts. The clouds swallowed them whole, and I let them go. 12 hours later, the world had changed color. Maui's sky stretched endless blue, and the air smelled of salt and blooming plumeria. The ocean glimmered like liquid glass, each wave erasing what came before. I rented a small beachfront cottage in Lahaina. The landlord, a retired teacher named Kimo, handed me the keys with a grin. "Stay as long as you want," he said. "Here, time's a suggestion." I smiled, and for the first time, I believed him. The first night, I stood barefoot on the sand, letting the water touch my toes. The Pacific was warm, patient, not like the cold, biting lakes I knew back home. Each wave felt like a reminder that life didn't end where you thought it would. In the morning, I woke to birds instead of alarms. The sun came early, flooding the small cottage with gold. I made coffee and sat on the porch, staring at the horizon. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like anyone's father, anyone's savior, anyone's disappointment. I was just Harold Merritt, a man who'd built bridges, paid debts, and finally stopped carrying other people's storms. Days passed in a rhythm softer than any I'd known. I walked the beaches at dawn, swam when the tide came in, and learned to breathe without counting bills or seconds. At night, I wrote in Maggie's journal, answering the letters she'd once written to herself. "You always worried too much, Harold. You thought keeping everyone fed was the same as keeping them whole. Now that you're alone, maybe you'll finally see how light feels when it isn't carrying the world." One afternoon, I wandered into a small market near Front Street. There, under a faded awning, a woman was painting seascapes on driftwood. Her hair was streaked with silver, her hands speckled with color. She looked up and smiled. "You look like someone who forgot how to sit still," she said. I laughed softly. Maybe I finally have the time to learn. Her name was Elaine, a widow from Oregon who'd moved to Maui years ago. She painted every day at the market, sold enough to live simply, and spent the rest of her time teaching kids how to hold a brush without fear. Over the next few weeks, we'd meet for coffee or sit near the shore, talking about everything and nothing. She never asked about my past. That was the gift. People who live near the sea understand that some stories are better left unspoken until the tide brings them back. One evening, she invited me to watch the sunset from a cliff above the beach. The wind carried the scent of salt and rain. "People think sunsets mean endings," she said, squinting at the horizon. "But it's really just light, taking a different path." I nodded, watching the sun melt into the ocean. That's the first lesson I've understood in years. A few days later, I rented a car and drove to Haleakala, the dormant volcano they call the House of the Sunday. The road wound upward through clouds and silence. At the summit, I stood on the edge of the world, staring down into an ocean of mist and fire-colored stone. I took off my wedding ring, It had been on my finger for 37 years. I held it for a moment, the metal warm from my skin. "You always said everything precious belongs to the earth," I whispered. "So I'm giving this back." I threw it into the crater. The gold flashed once, then disappeared into the clouds. A strange stillness filled me, not grief, not regret, just a quiet knowing that Maggie wasn't gone. She was simply part of everything now: the sky, the water, the light that touched my face. When I drove back down the mountain, I pulled over near the lookout to watch the waves far below. My phone buzzed with a notification, the first one I'd received since leaving Wisconsin. It was an email. Subject: Loan Investigation. Final Notice. I opened it slowly. The bank confirmed what I'd expected. Evan's forged loan had been flagged as fraudulent. They had launched a criminal inquiry and frozen his business accounts pending review. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt a deep, quiet ache. He had built his whole life on my shoulders. And now, he would learn what it meant to stand alone. I typed a single sentence in reply: "Do whatever you must. I have no objections." Then I turned the phone off. That night, I sat outside the cottage as the moon rose over the water. The sound of the waves was steady and forgiving. Elaine had given me one of her driftwood paintings, a small piece with a single word brushed across it in blue: "Begin." I hung it by the door. For the first time in decades, I felt weightless. No house keys digging into my pocket. No debts clinging to my name. No one waiting for me to fix their mess. The next morning, I walked barefoot along the sand, Maggie's journal in one hand, a seashell in the other. I wrote one final entry for the day. Maybe peace isn't found. Maybe it's built from everything you finally stop holding. When the tide came in, I let the shell go, a small offering to whatever mercy still lived in the world. And as the sun climbed higher, I realized something simple and profound. I hadn't escaped. I had finally arrived. When I finally flew back to Wisconsin, spring had arrived. The snow was gone, the lake thawed into silver glass, and the world smelled of wet pine and clean earth. I hadn't told anyone I was coming back. There was no one to tell. The taxi rolled slowly down Willow Creek Road. My house came into view, the same one that had been both my pride and my prison. The shingles glinted under the pale sunlight, but something felt hollow. No smoke from the chimney, no cars in the driveway. I stepped out, suitcase in hand, heart steady but curious. The wind tugged at my collar as I unlocked the front door. The hinges creaked the way they always had. Inside, everything echoed. The furniture was gone. The photographs stripped from the walls. Only dust outlines remained, where frames used to hang Maggie's watercolor of Lake Winnebago, Noah's school pictures, even the old family photo from the summer barbecue 20 years ago. I walked through the empty room slowly, like a man touring the shell of a life he'd once rented from hope. On the dining table sat a single white envelope. My name scrawled across the front in Evan's handwriting. I tore it open. "You win. We're gone. Don't expect forgiveness. Evan." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a parting shot carved out of pride. I folded the note carefully and set it beside Maggie's clock, which still ticked softly on the mantel. Somehow it had survived that. But there was another envelope beneath it, one I hadn't expected. It was official, stamped with the seal of the Outagamie County Court. I frowned and opened it. Inside was a notice: subpoena for witness testimony, financial fraud investigation. I sank into the nearest chair, the air leaving my lungs in a slow, quiet sigh. The attached letter from Charles explained everything. "Harold, the bank's fraud division discovered your son's forged documents. When they cross-checked digital signatures, they traced multiple false applications connected to his business accounts. He's under federal review for forgery and embezzlement. I advised the court that you were not involved and provided your documentation. You are clear of all charges. Your silence turned out to be the most powerful testimony of all." I let the letter fall onto the table. The irony was sharp, almost cruel. The son who had mocked me for being silent, for hovering, had been undone by the very noise of his own greed. For a moment, I didn't feel triumph, only a kind of weary sadness that settled deep in my bones. I wandered through the house, each empty space whispering its own goodbye. In the corner of the living room, I found Noah's old baseball, scuffed and faded. I turned it over in my hands and thought of the boy he used to be before the world taught him his father's pride. "Maybe you'll grow better," I murmured, setting it on the windowsill. In the study, dust covered the desk, where I'd once stacked every bill and receipt. I wiped it clean with my sleeve, then opened the window. Fresh air rushed in, cool, sharp, alive. On the floor near the vent, something glinted. A small USB drive, wedged between the boards. I picked it up, curious, and plugged it into my laptop. A folder opened. For Dad. Inside were video clips, recordings from the security cameras I'd installed years ago, the ones I'd forgotten about. The most recent file was dated just after I left. I clicked play. The living room appeared on the screen. Evan stood there, pacing, running a hand through his hair. Jenna sat on the couch, crying softly. "I told you this would happen," she said. "You pushed too far." "I was trying to fix things," Evan snapped. "He never trusted me. Not once." "Trust?" Jenna's voice cracked. "You forged his name. You stole his identity." He froze. The camera caught his face, pale, broken. "I just wanted to show him I could build something," he said, barely above a whisper. "I just wanted him to see me." The video ended. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark screen. I wanted to be angry, but instead I felt the slow ache of something far heavier: understanding. He hadn't just wanted money. He had wanted validation, proof that he mattered. I had given him everything except the one thing he really needed: boundaries that felt like love instead of control. I closed the laptop and looked around the empty house one last time. The echo of the clock filled the silence. Each tick sounded like a heartbeat. In that stillness, I whispered to the room, "I see you now, Evan. I just wish you'd seen me too." As I stood to leave, I noticed sunlight spilling through the window, catching on the old, paid-in-full confirmation paper still framed near the door. I smiled faintly. He had lost everything trying to prove he could win, and I had won everything the moment I stopped trying to prove I hadn't lost. Before locking up, I left one thing on the counter: the keys. Not for Evan, not for anyone else. Just as a symbol that I was finally free of doors that always led back to pain. When I stepped outside, the wind was soft and smelled faintly of rain. Across the lake, clouds gathered over the horizon, dark but distant. I turned toward town, suitcase in hand, walking the long road back to the station. Behind me, the house stood silent. No longer mine, no longer his, just a building full of echoes, learning how to rest. And as the first drops of rain touched my face, I knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to make room for peace. 6 months later, the lake shimmered gold again. Autumn had returned to Wisconsin, painting the trees around Willow Creek in deep amber and red. The air had that early chill that made every breath feel clean. I no longer lived at the old house. I sold it quietly, through Charles, to a young couple expecting their first child. They didn't care about its history. They saw possibility in the creaking floors and the porch that faced the water. That was enough for me. I bought a smaller cottage near Sturgeon Bay, on a quiet road lined with birch trees. The house had just 2 bedrooms, a wide porch, and the kind of silence that didn't ache. The first night I slept there, I dreamed of Maggie, not as she was in the hospital, but young again, laughing, her hair caught in the summer wind. When I woke up, I realized the ache had changed. It wasn't loss anymore, it was gratitude. Every morning I made coffee, stepped outside, and watched the light touch the water. I had stopped checking the news, stopped waiting for calls. Evan's legal troubles had unfolded exactly as Charles predicted. The loan forgery was exposed, the shop repossessed, and the business dissolved. He avoided prison through a settlement, but his reputation was gone. I didn't reach out, and neither did he. At first, that silence hurt. Then I learned to let it rest. Sometimes peace sounds exactly like distance. One Sunday, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was hesitant, but familiar. I carried it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. Dad, I don't know if you'll ever want to hear from me again, but I wanted to tell you something. You were right. About everything. I spent my whole life trying to prove I wasn't your mistake, and in the process, I became one. Jenna left. Noah's with her parents in Minnesota. I don't blame them. I blame myself. I remember what Mom used to say, that you fix things because you believe everything broken deserves another chance. Maybe I'm writing this to ask if that still applies to people too. If you ever want to see me again, I'll be in Madison, working at a repair shop. The address is on the back. If not, I understand. Evan. I sat there for a long time, the words trembling in my hands. I thought of the little boy who used to follow me around the garage, holding a wrench too big for his fingers, eager to learn how things worked. The same boy who grew up thinking love meant rescue instead of respect. I folded the letter and placed it beside Maggie's journal on the table. That afternoon, I took a drive. The highway wound through the golden fields, past old barns and pumpkin stands. I didn't plan where I was going. I just followed the horizon. When I reached the lakeshore, I pulled over. The air smelled of pine and smoke from distant chimneys. I took Maggie's journal out of the glove compartment and flipped to her last entry, the one she wrote 2 weeks before she died. If he ever loses his way, don't meet him with anger. Meet him where love left off. Just make sure you're whole before you reach out. I closed the book, looked at the water and whispered, "You always knew what to say, didn't you?" That evening, I sat on my porch under the amber light, pen in hand. I started a new letter. Evan, I got your message. I don't hate you. I never did. I just couldn't keep giving you the kind of love that kept you small. Your mother believed in second chances, and maybe she was right. Let's meet halfway literally. There's a diner off Highway 41, the one near the old train tracks. Sunday at noon. If you show up, we'll eat. If not, I'll still wish you well. Dad. I sealed it and mailed it before I could change my mind. The next 3 days passed slowly. I told myself I wouldn't be disappointed if he didn't come, but every hour brought that familiar restlessness, the one that sits behind your ribs when something unfinished still waits for closure. Sunday came gray and cool. The diner smelled of bacon and burnt coffee, the way all honest diners should. I sat by the window, ordered 2 mugs, and watched the road. For 30 minutes, nothing. Then, through the fogged glass, a car pulled up, old, dented, familiar. Evan stepped out, shoulders hunched, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. His hair was shorter, his eyes older. He hesitated at the door, then walked in. Dad, he said softly. Evan. He slid into the booth across from me. The silence between us was heavier than words, but not sharp, just fragile. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't sure you'd write. He gave a faint, tired smile. Guess we both surprised each other. We talked for hours. About nothing and everything: Noah's new school, the car he was fixing, how the shop smelled like grease and coffee. He apologized once, quiet but clear. I accepted, not because the past didn't matter, but because it finally did. When we stepped outside, the wind was cold again. He turned to leave, but then stopped. Dad, he said, voice rough. Thanks for meeting me. Thank your mother, I said. This was her idea, years ago. He nodded, eyes glistening. Then he walked to his car and drove away into the fading light. I stood there a long time, watching the dust settle behind him. That night, I returned home to my little cottage. The sun was sinking, the sky turning into that soft Midwestern purple that always made Maggie hum. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the light flicker across the water. I realized something then. Forgiveness isn't a door you open once. It's a house you rebuild slowly, one quiet act at a time. I picked up my pen and wrote the last line in Maggie's journal. Peace isn't silence. It's choosing which echoes you let stay. I closed the book, set it beside my cup, and smiled. The lake shimmered under the first stars, calm and infinite. Somewhere beyond the birch trees, the world kept spinning, messy, flawed, beautiful. And for the first time since that Christmas dinner, I felt entirely free. When love becomes control, it stops being love. The hardest lesson is learning that saving someone isn't always helping them sometimes. It's stopping before you drown with them. I left not out of anger, but out of mercy for him and for myself. And in the end, the distance that broke us also taught us how to see each other clearly again. Because peace isn't what you find after revenge. It's what's left when you finally forgive and move on.